Hello, Johnny from Eurogamer here with some brand new gameplay from Nioh. I got hands on with a formerly unseen level called Defiled Holy Mountain last week and found it to be a very instructive experience, by which I mean I died a lot. Despite the high body count, however, I managed to pick up a few things. 7 in fact, so without any further ado, here are 7 things I learned playing Nioh. Number 1. Nioh is tricky. There's no way of getting around this one, so we may as well get it out the way nice and early. If you played the demo released on PlayStation Network last year, you'll be well aware by now, but Nioh is pretty tricky. Note that I say tricky, not necessarily hard, because while a lot of the enemies are truly punishing, more on those in just a second, it's possible to make progress in Nioh simply by being methodical and level-headed. In other words, if you pay attention, play conservatively and don't overreach, you'll mostly be okay. Now, Nioh has already been compared countless times to the Souls games, so I'll try and keep those comparisons to a minimum. Safe to say that it's in their challenging nature that the two are most alike. Which is to say that Nioh is more exacting than it is hard. Even if you're up against an enemy you've faced countless times before, you need to pay attention at all times in Nioh, or you're going to wind up dead. Number 2, Japanese folklore is pretty creepy. You're going to encounter a lot of different enemies in Nioh, from human foot soldiers to creepy crawly things, to bats with an uncanny sense of timing. Bastards. Anyway, some of the enemies in Nioh are a bit special. You can tell when one of these is coming up, as it'll be announced by a morass of swirling black mist. These enemies are special not just because they're really challenging, but because they've been pulled straight from Japanese folklore. As Team Ninja head Mr. Hayashi explained in a presentation, these enemies are yokai, legendary creatures from Japanese folklore. This one, for instance, is the Karasu Tengu, a vaguely humanoid raven that's an expert in martial arts. That's the folklore explanation anyway. In Nioh, they're basically big, vicious enemies that are a nightmare to kill. I'm going to come out and admit it at this point, the Karasu Tengu bested me so many times I gave up on trying to fight it at all, instead cheesing my way past it with a bit of tactical falling. Which leads me neatly onto my next point, number 3, there's almost always another way. Structurally, Nioh sees you advance through a number of connected areas, saving your progress at shrines along the way to ensure you don't have to slog through the entire level every time you die and respawn. That's not to say, however, that it's a purely linear game. Generally speaking, each little segment of Nioh has a few different paths you can take in order to advance. Some of these are relatively easy, cutting out pockets of enemies, and even letting you get the drop on a yokai. Others are slightly trickier, and some, of course, are fully nightmarish. As a result, Nioh is a really fun game to explore, testing different routes in each area to find the path that's right for you. For example, Nioh has a really big emphasis on looting, so if you want to reap the rewards of taking everything on, you can. If you want to avoid head-on confrontation as much as possible, however, that's also an option. Number 4, stances are important. This is a pretty good time to talk about combat actually, because there's a hell of a lot of it in Nioh. Surviving each fight is all about tailoring your approach, and to help you along, there are 3 different stances you can adopt. The high stance is all about attacking power, emphasizing your attacks and helping you batter down your enemy's defenses before neatly dispatching them. The middle stance is more defensive, which is useful when you're expecting a bit of back and forth with your adversaries. When dodging is more important than parrying, however, there's the low stance. This stance is all about agility. It reduces the amount of stamina dodging uses up, which should give you more puff to counter-attack with. This is the stance I fell back on most regularly when facing the yokai, who are so powerful that blocking their attacks is rarely worthwhile. Getting out of the way and then getting a few digs in at the right opportunity was far more effective, when I remembered to manage my stamina properly, that is. Speaking of which, number 5, stances are important, but timing is everything. As you might expect, this being a Team Ninja title, reading your opponent in Nioh and knowing when to attack is extremely important, but so is being able to attack in the first place. Your stamina bar is deceptively easy to deplete. Exhaust it entirely and you'll be left unable to move and vulnerable to attack for a few seconds. To help stop this happening, however, there's a mechanic called key flow. Shortly after a series of attacks, you'll see some blue particles gather around your waist. Hold R1 at the right moment and this expended stamina will be recovered, allowing you to carry on the fight without temporarily incapacitating yourself. This mechanic is all important in dictating the flow of combat. Ignore it and you're really going to struggle. Master it, however, and your chances of survival will shoot up. Although, that said, you don't necessarily have to beat everything in a fair fight. Number 6. Sneaking is good. While more often than not your fighting will be done with melee weapons like swords, spears and polearms, Nioh also gives you access to a number of ranged weapons. While they're not as satisfying to wield, they nonetheless shouldn't be ignored, as Nioh is pretty generous with its headshot damage. As a result, sneaking up on an enemy and putting an arrow in the back of their skull is likely to take them out in one fell swoop. To be honest, sneaking up on anything in Nioh and giving it a good decking is a pretty good strategy, so it's worth treading softly as often as you can manage it. And finally, number 7, the soundtrack is amazing. Hopefully by now you've got a pretty good sense of what Nioh's gameplay can offer, but with this final point it's really worth emphasising that Nioh's soundtrack is fantastic. It's wistful and contemplative, and it provides a surprising poignancy to proceedings as you run around hacking bits off horrible monsters. There were several points during my time with Nioh, generally speaking just after I died, in which I stopped to just listen to the music for a bit. It's honestly beautiful, and after games like Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3, it's pretty refreshing not to have the soundtrack be an all-out assault on the senses. And there you have it, 7 things I learned playing Nioh. If there are any burning insights you'd like to share, feel free to do so in the comments below. Similarly, if you have any questions, do let me know and I'll do my very best to answer them. Hopefully you found this video interesting. If you did, please feel free to check out the other ones we have on offer. If you could like and subscribe, that would be lovely, but there's absolutely no pressure. Either way, thanks for watching, and have a good day.